I kept the scope and logic of the game as simple as possible for you to focus on learning React concepts and not get distracted by any HTML, CSS, or even the math that we need for this game. In fact, in this jsdrops.com/rgs 3.1 URL, I've given you all the distracting elements ready. This has a static HTML template for us to start with. It has all the CSS that I've used in the game, and also I've included some globals here that has the theme colors I chose for the play numbers and all the math science we're going to need. All of this is not really React, don't get distracted by it, but certainly take a look and familiarize yourself with the elements we're going to work with here. The static HTML markup here is already represented as a single React component. You should be comfortable with that by now. This is all JSX. Under the colors object, I used 4 properties. These represent all the statuses of any play number. A number starts as available, you click it, and that click might change the number into one of the other 3 statuses based on the current number of stars and the running sum of picked numbers. In the utils object, we have a few handy functions to sum an array, create an array of numbers, pick a random number in a range, or pick a random sum in an array of numbers. I've implemented these with vanilla JavaScript to keep things simple, but you can opt to use different implementations if you wish. You could, for example, use Lodash here. My point is, all of this logic has nothing to do with React. React can just use it. When that's the case, it's a good abstraction to have on its own rather than mixing it with the React application logic. One quick note before we begin. Don't get overwhelmed with the complexity of the game. Pick one small increment that's easy to test and focus on that. Don't, for example, start thinking about how to track candidate clicks right now. We're not ready for that. There are plenty of simpler things we can do. Pick one, focus 100% on it, test it, take a break maybe, then come pick another small testable increment. I think there are 2 beginner increments here. We could start extracting components and making a component tree. We need to do that. However, I think getting rid of any static lists here is the better way to begin. Stars will be rendered from a certain value, and that value will not always be 9. So we could get rid of all these static divs here and make a loop from a predefined value. Let me actually define a stars variable right away. Const stars equal, I'm going to start with 5. So the current focus is to display 5 stars based on this value. Now, we could use a for loop and manually push elements in an array for this task, but the declarative way of doing this is to start with an array of IDs and map those IDs into an array of star divs. This makes the code shorter and easier to understand and maintain. Avoid for and while loops in React if you can. It's not a hard rule though. In the utils object, we have this range function that we can use to create an array from a number. We just give it the min and the max. So let's use that. So instead of all these stars, we now need a dynamic expression. We're going to start from utils.range, create a range from 1 to the current number of stars, and map this range, because that range is now an array from 1 to 5, we're going to map it into an array of stars. So this gives us an ID for the star. Let's just call it star ID. And we want to map this into an array of the original divs that we had in the markup. And because this is a list of dynamic children, we should pass a key attribute that is unique for this node. So we can just use the star ID here. So test this increment on its own. And we are rendering 5 stars. Try to render a different number. There we go. And similarly, we should also get rid of all these numbers. Now that we know how to create a range, we can just do the same here. So let's just do that. Dynamic expression, utils. The range is always going to be from 1 to 9 in this case. And we're going to map it into a button component, right? So this gives us access to a single number. And instead of all these numbers, get rid of them and just take one of them here and put it in the map. And this is going to render the number itself. The number is 1 through 9. And we can also use the same number as a key here. So test that. We are rendering 9 numbers. And we got rid of all the static lists. Now here's the thing. You should separate this step from the extracting of components step, and I think by doing this first, you get a better idea into what components are good candidates to be extracted on their own. One other thing we could do here is start the number of stars with a random number each time the component renders. This is easy. We also have the random function here in utils. So instead of 6 here, we can do utils.random and 1 through 9 and test that. So now each time the component renders, a different random number of stars should appear. Now, because the number of stars is going to change while we're playing, and we need React to reflect this change in the UI, we should probably make the star count a state element. And that's easy because we can take this initial value and do a useState call and pass this initial value to the useState call. And if you remember, the useState call returns an array of 2 elements. So we can have stars and we can have set stars. So this should work as well, but now the number of stars is a state element. We read it from the state, and we could change this state element, and React is going to re-render the number of stars. Now here's the thing. In the current increment we're focusing on, we did not really need to make the stars variable a state element. So this is a little bit of thinking ahead. We don't have enough clues that this state element is absolutely needed. And guess what? It is not really needed if we're to super optimize the code. But from experience, whenever you identify a data element that's used in the UI and is going to change value, you should make it into a state element. And only optimize the elements on the state when you have enough clues about how they fit with the other elements on the state. It is normal for the state elements of a React components to grow and shrink as we design them. I've saved the code we have so far under the RGS 3.2 link here.